Welcome back, viewers. Our next guest is Chelsea Williams, international women's rights activist. She's involved in a couple of movements throughout the U.S., racial justice, gender equality, and reproductive rights. She spent the last 5 years working at the intersections of global gender policy, movement building, and youth-led activism. She is a Georgetown University graduate, holds a master's also from George Washington University in public policy, concentrating in women's, gender, and sexual studies. She is the perfect speaker that we had on for our R. Kelly MJ conversation, and maybe we can delve into bring this mic in a little closer to you. Okay. So, as you know, we've already introduced you, and we appreciate you having us on the show, or having you being on the show with us. Is there anything that you want to tell us about, like what brought you into the women's rights activism movement?
Sure. So I can answer more kind of like what brought me into like the issue area. Obviously, like I grew up with a single mother, like many of us, with a lot of strong women in my life, and kind of always had this understanding of like girl power, but didn't really understand what my lived experiences were, how they connected to other systems of oppression, right, and all that stuff. Until I got to Georgetown, where I met you, and kind of was brought into the women's studies, feminist theory space. And then from there, I was like, okay, this is what I need to do. This is what I want to do. I originally wanted to be a lawyer. And then was like, actually, I can do kind of movement building for a career. So, yeah.
So can you just get into a little bit about what movement building is? Like, what is that?
What does that look like?
What does that look like in plain language?
Sure. So, we're obviously maybe more, or maybe a lot of listeners are more aware of a lot of the movements that happen kind of like in our backyards. Like, so for example, the Women's March, everyone kind of knows, okay, it was this huge march after the inauguration of Trump, and, a lot of the leaders from that movement are based in New York City. So we kind of see movements as like protests often, and kind of what happens in our neighborhoods. So that is kind of maybe the easiest way to connect with that means to us. But for every march, for every protest, for every strike, there was like a climate change strike yesterday that like these young people led. It was so cute. Not cute. It was powerful. It was great. But for all of those kind of big moments, there's a lot of planning in the background. There's a lot of policy work. There's a lot of dope people organizing that goes behind it. And for me, most of the work that I've done has been more on a global scale. So really working with activists from around the world who are focusing on issues in their communities. And my kind of ultimate passion is kind of connecting. So what's going on, let's say, in India or in a small rural village in Kenya or in Ireland where they just were able to legalize abortion. Really connecting those to the things that happen in our lives in Bushwick or in the U.S.
Nice. Okay. It's like doing this type of work, has it changed you as a woman?
Absolutely. First dates are hard. To be like, oh, you a feminist? I'm like, absolutely. Yeah.
Explain to our listeners, what does it mean to be a feminist?
What does it mean to be a feminist?
Some people, there's different definitions, and different people see it from different ends of the spectrum. Because I think feminism is not one thing. I think there's.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's more common now for women to identify as feminists. So I think that's a good thing in a lot of ways. But on the flip side, it has been somewhat watered down. So anybody just thinks like, oh, I believe a woman is equal, I'm a feminist. Yeah, sure, but push that a little bit deeper. What does that mean in your everyday life? What does that mean in your actions? What does that mean in the systems and the laws, et cetera, et cetera? So for me, feminism it's not just, yay, women. It's a political ideology. There are specific kind of things that you have to believe in order to be a feminist. So for me, I say, like, if you're not pro-choice, you cannot be a feminist. So that's something I really hold strongly.
I hope it's not too personal, but are there any movements that are like more close to home to you?
Like
that inspire you the most?
Like specific within the feminist movement?
Yeah.
I mean, one thing, like, a lot of these movements are like intersected, right? So, like,
Mhm.
the criminal justice movement and the feminist movement, there are clear intersections. So, I actually, before I even got into gender issues, I was more focused on, like, criminal justice reform. So, I feel strongly about that, kind of how we criminalize women based on the decisions on their bodies,
Okay.
how we criminalize mothers, how we criminalize young girls in school, things like that. So that's really strong. Obviously, yeah, like the Me Too movement, every single woman has a story, one way or another, that can, resonate and that would be considered Me Too. Some more dramatic than others and don't necessarily say some people's are harder, but you know what I'm trying to say. So every woman can, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to stop him because he had a question.
Um,
How do you feel about domestic violence and how the justice system handles it?
That's such a good question. And yeah, that's actually something I feel very strongly about. A lot of women in my family have been victims or survivors of domestic violence. Um, how they handle it. So it's crazy because there's a lot of like little things, right? So oftentimes, especially now, there's what we call like mandatory arrest. So if a call is made, um, because historically a lot of it has been like, oh, it's just couples fighting. Now cops often feel like, no, we need to arrest somebody, which has actually led to more women being arrested, um, which is crazy. And then when we think about where that intersects with like immigration, right?
Yeah.
So if you're undocumented and you're not gonna want to call the police, and let's say you're undocumented or your man's undocumented or whatever. You know what I mean? So it's like really tricky.
So you feel like the domestic violence laws are almost being used against women?
Basically, yeah.
Very interesting.
And it's hard, right? It's like that weird. A lot of the feminists from like years back pushed really heavily to make these laws more enforceable, more specific, and they did a lot of good work for domestic violence to even be taken seriously. But now we see it having some crazy effects on immigrant women or women of color. We're seeing more women get arrested if they engage in anything. You know what I mean? Even if you think about some like the celebrity things that have happened, you know what I mean? Like it's crazy. So it's hard.
Can you get a little bit more in detail about, like, give me an example of how a woman has, like, a domestic violence law has been used against a woman to put her in jail? Do you know a specific?
So that's what I'm saying, kind of like the mandatory arrest laws. So this idea that somebody needs to be arrested.
Is that a federal law or is it
No, that's all at the state level, right? Yeah. But so a lot of that it's been tricky because it's like everyone's opinion on the criminal justice system varies, right? So are our police officers well trained to deal with these situations? Is arrest always the right way to go?
Sure.
How do we, when a woman depends on a man financially and then you take him away, what does that then do for the family? You know what I mean? So it's complicated. But that's why it's important to have conversations and make sure that, women and feminist movement builders are in the rooms, helping craft like specific laws and also helping craft the trainings and whatnot that police go through.
Where do you stand on prostitution? Female prostitution.
Answer the question. It should be legalized. Absolutely.
Sex
work is work. Legalize it. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Actually, and let me go back on that because a lot of the people who are really, that's not my like main area, but a lot of people who do push for it's not legalization. Excuse me. It's to decriminalize. So that kind of weird like.
It's like what would they do to
marijuana? Right. That small difference actually makes a big difference. A lot of the women who really push for decriminalization of sex work. Actually don't want it to be fully legalized because then that's where
I guess that's when the
it gets regulated and all that stuff, and it can get tricky. But
so you're saying people in the movement are specifically saying
to decriminalize.
Let's decriminalize it. But what does that look like? Is it just then if you're caught selling yourself, do you just get
a ticket,
rerouted or ticketed instead of getting arrested?
Well,
by rerouted I mean like put in a program.
No, so I think basically the idea is if you're a cop, right, and you see if you see what you think is prostitution, at this point right now, you are told that you are supposed to arrest.
Yeah.
And oftentimes will focus more on the sex worker herself, and not all sex workers are women, so I shouldn't necessarily say that, but the sex worker themselves. And often not the like John, the person who pays, right? And also just like this idea of like arresting versus, you know what I mean? So I think decriminalization can look differently. And to be honest, I'm not an expert on this. So there's movements, this like Decrim NY, I believe, is the name of the movement. So look more information up there because they got more of the answers. I'm just somebody who reads and listens and think they're doing great work. So and agree.
Do you have sort of a twofold question? So, any advice you have for women that want to get involved in the feminist movement, and then what advice do you have for let's say a teenage boy who's growing up today in a much more feminine accepting world?
Okay.
What advice do you have for a teenage boy, let's say, that's not sure? That's it. You know, teenage years are very interesting. Right? So let's say you have a teenage boy who's not sure of themselves and is being pulled in all these different directions. What advice would you have for that type of boy in terms of embracing their femininity?
Okay, so for the first question, those are two very different questions.
Yes.
For the first question, I mean, I think anyone can get involved in movements, right? We luckily have access to social media, which I know we talked about earlier today, where like tech and social media can go wrong, but in many ways that they go right.
For sure.
Is, you know, especially if you live in New York City or live in a large metropolitan area, and even if you don't, you can see, you know, marches and protests being planned, and oftentimes just going to one, even if you go by yourself, you can meet people, get more information, and get involved. So I would definitely recommend to just make sure you're following local movements and then also national and global movements who will push out that information. And then on the flip side, like if you're in college and you are thinking really like this is like a career path, you know, obviously there are so many organizations that you've never heard of. Like I said, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And instead, I kind of just now have worked for a lot of NGOs and nonprofits that I just didn't know existed, that do really awesome work and do very specific work. So just do your research, go out there and see where you can get plugged into. But there's a career path in there, and no, you're not going to be making the money of like an investment banker, but
you can make a living.
You can make a living. But we trying, right? Even in gentrified Bush, right?
Quick fun fact.
Fun fact.
Quick fun fact. Since it's Women's History Month, one of the oldest and first biggest women's movements, which started in 1968, is the Miss America pageants. I just wanted to say that.
Miss America pageant?
Yeah, the Miss America pageant. That was kind of interesting.
So that's an interesting point, right?
Right. There's complications with that, right?
And that's what I meant by earlier, right?
Wait,
so you have women.
That was a good one.
Yeah,
you have women that have taken the feminist movement to say, you know, we don't want to be the feminine type. We don't want to be the feminist who's being anti-men. So let's be more feminine and do like a Miss America pageant. I don't know if I'm asking that the right way.
So, I mean, there's an understanding of,
like,
again, girl
women.
power, right? Or like,
that's what I
yay,
mean. Like,
right?
girl power,
Right? It's very easy to tap like into, right? Like every woman, no matter how conservative or, you know, we have plenty of super Republican conservative women who are like, yeah, girl power, yeah, we want more women in Congress, yeah, we want more women, you know, at the head of the table, things like that. That's cool. That's not feminism. That's cool, right? I mean, like, I'm not mad that conservative women recognize that women can be great leaders, but that's not feminism, right? So it's not being anti-man, it's being anti-oppression, anti-patriarchy. So it might feel like it's anti-man in a specific interaction or in a second, but like you have to get over it, right?
Just more like equality.
Right. Like you have, in order for people to be equal, that's recognizing that some people are higher than the others, right? So naturally, at some point, it might feel like you as a man or you as a white person or you as whoever has privilege might be feeling like you're losing power. You are losing power. That's the fucking point. Ooh, that's good language. But that's the point. You know what I mean? Like you're losing. That's the point. So like it's not anti-man, it's anti-oppression. But you just happen to be. If you're a man, you're benefiting from that oppression.
Sure.
Yeah.
But if you're a boy, what was your question? If you're a boy growing up, like how do you
embrace your?
How do you teach a young man to embrace his masculinity while not being oppressive about it, right? You know, because I think now we have like the buzzword is toxic masculinity.
Masculinity,
Right?
yes.
So everybody's pushing this new word about toxic masculinity. And of course, there are toxic versions of masculinity, right? You have physically abusive men, to me, is probably the most toxic. Actually, probably psychologically abusive is probably the most toxic because it's the least.
R. Kelly.
For sure, it's the least hardest to see
Right.
in public. You know, if you see somebody punching a woman, that's obvious, right?
Right.
If you get a 21-year-old to lie about your relationship like R. Kelly's doing, that's harder to see that type of abuse. But so, how do you teach a young man to embrace to be a man in a world that is more openly feminine now, right? More openly feminist now. How does somebody reconcile that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard, right? So, like, for me, I don't have children, but I hope to have children, and I hope to have a son, or someone who identifies as a son or masculine. But I think I'm less worried about teaching your child to be a man and more teaching them how to be a good person. So what does that mean to you? A lot of times people talk about like chivalry or like good manhood, but like a lot of those things are just generally being polite and a good person, right? So I don't want to teach my son to hold the door open for women. In general, it's nice, even if someone's coming, keep the door, you know what I mean? Like, how, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Or I want to teach my son to be hardworking or to, you know, be able to provide for themselves and if they decide to have a family one day. But I want to teach my daughter that too. Yeah. So it's, you know what I mean? I think, I hear you though, like, it's hard because especially like culturally, like if you're raising a son, like, you're Dominican, I don't know what you
that was my follow-up question.
Yeah, like how do you do that in this like sense of like this is culture? That's where it gets a little bit trickier, but I think we can find ways to reconcile.
So that was my next follow-up to that, right? Then how do you reconcile? How does someone reconcile growing up in a culture that is masculine or machista in some situations, right? Which is the extreme of masculine. How does someone, for example, me, I guess I can speak for myself, but how would you speak to a 15-year-old as a feminist? How do they reconcile growing up in a Dominican masculine culture while still respecting women, right? And then the other end of it is in the dating scene, right? How does
I was waiting for you to talk about it. Like consent, it's so confusing.
I forget the comedian's name, but there was a comedian I used to watch. What was that BET show back in the days? They used to show like late night comedy back in the days, like
Def Jam?
I don't think it was Def Jam. It was something else. I forget, but whatever. It's not important. But the comedian once said, "Nowadays, you gotta hold the door for women, and as they're walking through, you slam the door behind them. It's like women want you to be a good guy, but then they want you to be a bad guy at the same time. Because it's not known, but a lot of people say, you know, women want bad men, not bad to smack them around.
Edgy.
I don't think that's what they mean. I think they mean more like just
tough.
I think just like confidence is attractive.
Yeah.
I think that's all it is. It's not being aggressive. It's just, you know, being comfortable in your own skin. That's all it is. I think that attracts women, and I think it attracts men as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
From both sides. Mm-hmm. But when y'all was more about what y'all were talking about, her teaching how you teach a boy to be to embrace his masculinity, but be feminine as well. I think just teaching the kid good morals in general is the way to go. You know what I mean?
Honor, manners, and respect.
And respect, and then if he can harness that as a young age, and he'll grow and understand how other people act and see what's right and wrong for them.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, just adding on to what she was saying.
Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, as far as, like, the question about, like, culture, so, I mean, like, a lot of us come from families that have very clear understandings of how things are supposed to be, right? So, my grandmother, I was with her yesterday, and she was like, how old are you again? I keep forgetting. My grandma's 85, right? She's from Cuba. She was like, oh, my God, when are you going to have kids? She has 2 great grandkids, my beautiful baby cousins, but she was like, you know, I wanna live to see your kids. And first of all, I was pissed because I'm like, you got 2 other granddaughters who are older than me that ain't got kids neither, so you better go talk to them, first of all. And then second of all, I was like, I have no plans to have kids anytime soon. But of course, in my grandmother's head, it's like, you're 26 years old, you know.
You should have been had kids.
Right, it's like, where's your man at? Where's your kids? Where's your, you know what I mean? I don't need to fight with my grandmother every day. My goal isn't to make my grandmother a 21st century progressive feminist. It's not that deep, right? Like, I talk to her about certain things, and she, I watch certain shows with her, and, she gets it already a little bit, but I don't need to fight with her, right? So you can let your kind of family be to some degree while pushing where if they are, like, for example, if like your family's homophobic or something, and you have a gay child or something, like, that's where you might need to address it more directly. But in general, like, I don't need to fight with my family. But I do need to challenge the things that I see with my peers. So, if I see things happening with my cousins or my baby cousins, for example, who are, I think, 7 and 8 right now, if I'm not incorrect, I want to do more for them to make sure, they're a little bit less in that, patriarchal, machismo, right, stuff. But it's hard, yeah. Like, I mean, you see it now. My baby cousins, they're, like, literally 7, 8, and I can't even help it either. Like, I woke up, I stayed at my cousin's house last night, so I woke up and I was like, good morning, beautiful. I didn't say that to my baby cousin. I didn't say good morning, handsome. I was just like, what's up, CJ? Like, whereas my baby cousin, the young girl, I was like, good morning, beautiful. I just told her in her head that, like, you're beautiful, which is cool, but it's like, why do I have to constantly remind her that she is, you know what I mean? So,
That makes sense.
anyways, it's hard. We gotta constantly.
It's complicated.
Yeah, we have to do better with ourselves, but also recognize that, like, we still live in society, and we can't fight every battle every day.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
There's just a topic to finish off the conversation, because you just what women in history or maybe today have inspired you or inspire you currently to do what you do.
Yeah, it's so funny. You started off this podcast and you shouted out Susan B. Anthony. Don't ever do that again. Susan B. Anthony's trash, okay? Shout out Ida B. Wells next time you want to talk about a suffragist. That's a black woman suffragist who also worked like anti-lynching and all that stuff. A lot of these early women suffragists were very intentionally excluding black women from the movement, and then also were very they were upset that black men got the vote for them. Mm-hmm. So, in general, I think we need to always look at history with a critical eye. So, yeah, shout out to Ida B. Wells.
That's a fact.
Yeah, bell hooks. I always, like, there's a lot of dudes who, like, I've dated, and I'll just buy them a bell hooks book, like, do better. Here, take this book, read it.
What's the name of the book? I'm gonna read
Bell
it.
Hooks.
No, I'm serious though.
The book that I love is called We Real Cool, and it's specifically about black men and masculinity. But that's one of my favorite books from her. But she has a lot of really good books about like relationships and love and feminism, all these different things. So Bell Hooks is great and somewhat like easily can read. And then like. Well, actually, somebody else I do want to shout out today, too. It's been a year anniversary since the murder of Marielle Franco, who was a Afro-Brazilian activist who was murdered. We still don't know who murdered her, but there's a lot of conspiracy theories. She was a feminist activist doing really good stuff. And if anybody knows about what's going on in Brazil, it's a new right-wing president and all those things. So.
It's the Brazilian Donald Trump.
Yeah, basically, like, actually, that's a fact. So, Marielle Franco, rest in power, excuse me, and continuing to uplift the Brazilian activists who are pushing for her to find out who murdered her.
All right. So, thank you, Chelsea, again,
for
coming on our show. It was
That's
a pleasure
a
having you. Yeah, that's a fact. And we hope that you
continue to fight.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to go on to another quick music break, the last and final music break before we end the segment. And thank you for our listeners again. You know where to find us at YouTube at That's a Fact NYC, Instagram at That's a Fact NYC,
and YouTube page That's a Fact NYC,
Facebook, every platform.
Yeah.
Everything feels better in the summertime. Sitting on the stoop with my girls when it's hot outside. Riding around here, blowing in the wind. Hold up, stop. I need that chino la drink as the night gets shorter. So too, I fucking problems. My only problem is how many layers gotta have on. So summer life is better wherever. the streets. From the kids hasta lo viejo, playing domino, feeling the breeze. And even with the birds flowing in the wind, the sound of the four-wheelers really makes me think back to a time when I was just a little kid, and the boat I opened was the only thing that had me lit. Now that at my night I roll up a spliff, not to forget the struggle, clarify what's in my plate. My third eye is in sync with the stars. I've been looking down from way up above. My bushwick is in the cosmos, where we all look up, we show mad love, we even look good as fuck, can't fuck with us, man. This bushwick summer life feels